Good evening. Welcome to the May 22nd City Council meeting. I call it to order. And the first item is under general orders. And item A, I'm going to ask Mr. McNichol to give an explanation.
Well, Friday afternoon, we received communication from ODOT, that Oklahoma Department of Transportation, in regards to the 6th and Perkins project, that because of some issues with utilities, and I assume some with weather, that the project at 6th and Perkins was behind, and to be able to speed that project up, that they needed an immediate closing of the north leg of Perkins Road, and that would be from about the curb line of the north leg of 6th to, I believe, the driveway of the donut shop about, to close that completely, to put in some utility lines, and further, that they really desire to have the street closed on the west leg near the mill, and I assume other parts of it, for the period of May 31st through about July 23rd, to be able to catch back up on that project and get it done. It would otherwise run into October, and depending on weather, perhaps November. And we have ODOT representatives here tonight, and Mr. Dorman tells me I don't have the authority to close the street that long. So that is a decision for the council, and I'm sure we could invite the ODOT representatives up, either one of you, if you have anything you would like to tell us. Yes, please.
Hi. Well, we really just want to answer any questions that you guys have, and give you a little bit of detail on what exactly we're asking to do. The immediate closure that we are asking for on the north leg of this intersection would be for Tuesday, and would be to be reopened on Friday by 5 p.m. And this would allow the contractor to finish some utility lines and to lay a portion of their roadway bed, and would allow for us to get traffic switched to the next phase for 177. The west leg would be a much more substantial closure. As you guys know, I'm sure there's two bridges in that extent. Sorry, there are two bridges in that extent, and the bridges are a critical item to getting this project completed on time. So closing the west leg, we've actually been in communication with the contractor and have been looking at ways to speed up that closure so it's not needed for as long. And right now what we're looking at is a closure from about June 5th and then reopening before the July 4th weekend. So that is more in line with what we are looking to do. It would be about a 4, at the most a 5-week closure if we let them do it a week earlier. But we understand the impact that this has in this area, and we have visited with some of the businesses, and we hear their concerns. And we want to, any impacts that we have, we want to minimize those as much as we can, with the understanding that the longer this project goes on, the continued impact it has. So our goal is to shorten the duration of the impact. And I would just like to keep you guys in mind when you're discussing this. So that west leg closure would allow us to complete the phase of the bridge construction that we're on right now, so we can get that reopened, and we can start on the second phase of the bridge. And with both of these closures, we anticipate that this would get us onto a completion date that is more in line with the beginning of September, which is where we initially had committed to the city and to the residents to be. So this would get us back on track for that. And as you guys know, the impacts to football season, the city sees an influx of traffic, and that was our intent, was to have this completed by that time to minimize the impacts to that traffic. And this would enable us to get much closer to that goal.
So the entirety of the intersection would never be closed. It would just be either the north leg or the west leg.
Correct.
North leg for 4 days and the west leg for about a month.
Up to a maximum of 5 weeks, correct.
Okay, 5 weeks.
Yeah. And I say up to a maximum of 5 weeks because everything is weather dependent.
Right.
So the goal would be 3, but it could be up to a maximum of 5.
We appreciate that you talked with the businesses because I know that we're definitely concerned about that too, but
Absolutely.
I don't really see another alternative. So thank you for trying to make it the shortest amount possible.
Absolutely.
And I will open it up to other questions. Counselors?
How far west is the closure going to need to be for the west end portion?
We would close it from the intersection to the first drive at the mill, so we could keep local access to the mill for harvest and things like that. We definitely are not going to cut anyone off by any of these closures. We're going to maintain local traffic and business access during these closures. But the actual closure would be from the last drive of the mill to the intersection. That encompasses both of our bridges.
So the initial, I went back and looked at the sort of initial statement on how this was going to be done, and it talks about one lane being open in every direction for the entirety of the project. And my sense is that we're just talking about the schedule being so far behind at this point that it's necessitated a change from that.
That's correct.
What, are there any other options for doing this so that we don't cut traffic off? I mean, what else has been considered?
There are other considerations that we are looking at to reduce time, such as changing our pavement design. There's a certain process that has to happen with the dirt, and then also we build the base and then the actual concrete roadway that you see on top. So we're looking at ways to modify that would accelerate that process, but it's still not going to give us the kind of time savings that this is going to. So for lack of better terms, this gives us the most bang for our buck.
Sure.
So we are definitely exploring other options, but we also have to keep in mind that we want a very good, long-lasting product as well.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I want you
there's
to do
a
it right.
balance there, yeah.
People have asked about the possibility of having multiple crews working, potentially working overnight or when it's dark or longer hours, that sort of thing.
So one thing to keep in mind is that when these contracts are bid, the contractors' night work and things of that nature are bid into that. That is not how this contract was awarded. This contract was not awarded for crews to work 24 hours a day around the clock. So the contractor has no money built into the contract to do that. And that is a significant increase in contract price to do that. One that was not in any way, shape, or form budgeted. We did place incentives on this contract to incentivize the contractor to complete early. It's a daily incentive rate that's applied, and there's also a disincentive rate. So if they don't complete it by the September 1st date, then they will be applied a disincentive as well. So we were aware of that stringent completion date, and we tried to incentivize and disincentivize it as much as possible. But unless we stipulate in the bidding process that around-the-clock work is required, there's no way that we can enforce that.
Okay. So last question for me, just about that incentive. I remember something when we were talking about this contract a while back, something about if lanes were closed, maybe it was just during football, that there was a certain amount of money that was going to have to be paid back into the contract if they wanted to close lanes during high traffic times or that sort of thing. I assume that, or does that come into play here with this closure or not?
Yes, so that's built into the contract no matter how long the project takes, no matter how delayed that it is. It's what we call lane rental special provision. And it essentially does not allow them to close any lanes the Thursday before or the day before a home football game, the Thursday before. So if it's on a Saturday, it would be a Thursday, and they cannot, it has to stay open until the day after the football game. So, and if they don't, it's $20,000 per lane per hour that it's closed. So that will be enforced no matter how delayed the project gets. They have to find a way to keep those lanes open during that time.
That being said, that is also, we can apply that to holidays as we deem. And so we are holding them to that lane rental for this closure this week.
Okay.
If they, we're holding them to a 5 p.m. Friday deadline, and we will enforce lane rentals after that. The contractor is aware and has agreed to that. So we're holding them to that on this closure. We have not discussed that on the longer closure yet, but those discussions will probably come up.
Okay, yeah, around July 4, and that's.
Right, and that the intent would be for that to be reopened before July 4th. And just like for Memorial Day, traffic is higher this weekend, and July 4th is the same way. So we would expect to have similar provisions in place for that.
Thank you.
Do we make a motion?
Well, it's up to you. But, I mean, obviously, the project is what it is, but the city manager would need authority to enter any agreement that would require a closure beyond his statutorily mandated authority. And also, the contracts have provisions in them to hold ODOT harmless for damages to the detour route, so you would have to be in agreement on that as well, because he doesn't have the authority to waive off that kind of damage.
Is that in the last version?
I was gonna say, I thought I read to the contrary.
That's for the first 4 days. We are indemnified for the period Tuesday through Friday. And there's some people in the audience that own businesses in that area that I talked to Friday, and this is somewhat changed, and I hope that you have heard that. We're talking about one leg at a time being closed, not the entire intersection. Obviously, Mr. Fairbanks, you would be most impacted for that closure for the 4 to 6 week period, depending on weather.
And I know it's not really on the agenda, but are there people here tonight?
There are people here tonight. I don't know if they want to speak or not. Give us a minute.
Okay.
Please come forward and state your name and your address, please. State your name and your address.
David Fairbanks, my home address,
Or your
my business,
Yeah.
512 East 6, Stillwater Milling Company. Jessica and Seth came down and visited with us Friday, and I was very appreciative of them coming and visiting with us. And they were still talking with the contractor as to what was possible, and I couldn't hear the dates you came up with today.
We're looking at the first week of June, so 2 weeks
Okay.
from now, and with the anticipation of being reopened by the July 4th weekend.
Okay. So that would be the max period.
The max period would be 1 week after July 4th, but that isn't solidified
Okay.
quite yet. So
Well, that's better than
it is.
the 8 weeks, which we
So when we
thought was,
originally talked, we had said 8 weeks, and we had told him, let us get back to the drawing board and come back to you.
Okay.
That's what we've done.
and if that doesn't happen, if something happens, is there penalties for that?
No,
No. So there's no guarantees.
there's no guarantee.
Okay.
Well, I understood you to say that the lane rental would be effective for July 4th. That's it.
To have it open for July 4th, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if they weren't.
The closure.
Staff, that they wouldn't be able to allow to reclose it. But
Okay.
finish whatever work they needed to get done.
Okay. This June is wheat harvest in Oklahoma, and so we kind of need to get trucks in, semis, basically. And I assume you've looked at the routes and whether semis can, in fact, get to the mill. I haven't heard that yet, but I'm assuming that that's the case.
David, every route would be designed so that there was easy truck traffic, so predominantly 4-lane roads, because some people have suggested, well, why don't you use third? Well, because you can't turn a truck. I have not seen the detour for the longer closure yet. They're the detour that's been devised, but the one for the 4 days next week, or this week, is all 4-lane roads. It's Hall of Fame, Maine.
The sooner we could get that information, the better, more help it would be to us. We have some customers
You have it?
quite a ways south that come 50, 60 miles and bring us wheat. And we know who they are, so we could get word to them. It's more like our customers that, our general customers that come daily when it's open, when they can get to us, that will be missing. And so that's kind of a serious deal. Another question is whether or not there, we could expect signage that would indicate where we're at and how to get there.
Yes, part of the traffic control plan submitted by the contractor does include a signed detour. That's what we're hoping to accomplish tonight, is basically us being allowed to sign that detour. But there will be signs out calling for detour of 177, and they're going to put all those out tomorrow.
Will there be any promotion of what businesses are affected? I mean, as far as how to get to Stillwater Mill again?
We can't promote how to get anywhere, but we can sign a detour for the highway. So that's what we're going to do in this case, is sign how to get to the other side of this closure. And but access will be maintained, but we can't sign different businesses and how to get to them.
Well, I noticed
Can we?
in the paper this week, at least the newspaper, indicated which businesses were
And I don't know of any other way to post it.
affected and how to get there. So hopefully they'll do that
Yeah,
when you close the west way.
right.
I appreciate the attitude of everybody. I will tell you, we've been affected now for several months, and yes, it does hurt the business, but I have appreciated the attitude of everybody involved, and I think they've done as much as they could to help us.
David, one of the things that we can do through Twitter and Facebook and all of those kinds of things is help out those affected businesses by giving that route, as well as any media releases that we put out. We can do that.
Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your attitude as well, and thank you to everybody involved. Okay, is there anyone else? All right, then is there a motion?
I will make a motion to authorize signing of the detour agreement.
Yes, that it would be signing of the detour route agreement and release of any damages concurrent with that as well.
Oh. So let's explain that for a second.
The documentation that they send us requires two things: that we acknowledge that we're willing to create a detour route, and then secondly, it basically absolves them of liability for damage to the city's surface streets caused by the vehicles that travel over it during the period that the detour route is in place. Oh, good.
Well, and the other thing that I will tell you is that there is no current permitting of oversized and wide loads now, and that will continue through that period. So.
We are not asking the city we're not asking to not be responsible for any damages caused. So initially, when this discussion came forward, we came back and said for this 4-day closure, we've had subsequent talks with our executive senior level staff, and we are no longer asking the city to carry that.
Outstanding.
So
Very good.
But
The most recent agreement I sent over reflected that, and
it will be applied to the west leg as well.
It'll be applied. And,
Okay.
we've gone through and documented the existing condition.
And when he says documented, what we will do is, we have done for the north leg, is we'll take video footage and literal pictures of every location where there's current damage, and with commentary. So we will we'll have documentation on what it looked like prior to using it as a detour route. So
That's for both?
That's
the
for
north
both.
and the west
legs.
lane
Yeah, when we do
We've
both
documented
closures.
Hall of Fame Avenue and Main Street from Hall of Fame down to 6th. We've documented this.
And it'll be documented again once we did the west leg closure.
So just to be clear, do we have a detour set, a route ready for the west leg?
We're
closure?
assuming the same, we're assuming similar,
A similar route using the same streets because it is a 4-lane corridor, and that Hall of Fame is in relatively good condition, and Main is the quickest 4-lane around.
So-
We assumed that, and that's what we have pitched to the city for us to use.
So a truck coming from 177 to the south of Stillwater, coming up 177 to the north, to get to the mill, will go past 51 to Hall of Fame, and then back down Main and over to 6 to the mill.
correct?
That was really the best route we could find with the best pavement condition. So we wouldn't make a bad situation worse.
Yeah, we sure don't want him using South Main, particularly around 10th.
Yeah, no South Main,
Yeah.
and we definitely didn't want to send them through downtown, so.
Thank you.
So what we are needing from the city is just to ensure that we can sign that route. That's,
And the agreement I had sent over, the most recent one, only covers this 4-day closure, and we will negotiate again for the second closure when we hammer out the finer details.
So then, do we need to make a motion to accept the 4-lane the 4-day closure for now and wait until the rest is negotiated to make a motion on that?
the only
Well, the
other
re-
thing that will be negotiated is the route.
The request is to authorize the city manager to do that. I mean, he has closure authority. The issue was the waiver of the damages. And so with that off the table, the manager, other than you just saying that, we authorize the manager to sign the authorization for the detour route, we're pretty much done.
So I'll make that motion at this point. Authorize the city manager to negotiate the detour route.
I'll second. Go get everyone.
We have a motion and a second to authorize the city manager to sign the agreement. Please vote.
Okay.
And with a vote of 3-0, city manager is now authorized to sign those agreements.
And we appreciate the business folks that have attended here tonight, and it's, I know it's still not pleasant, but it's a much better thing than what we originally thought on Friday, not having the entire intersection closed, so thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
That brings us to item B, presentation and discussion of proposed events policy.
And John McClenny will have that report.
Okay. If you recall, we did a study back last year with the OSU Industrial Engineering Management students, and they did a presentation to council at that time about this. This is part 2 of that particular issue. So I want to start off by saying that we all recognize that events are a good thing. This isn't meant to be something that is down on events, that's for sure. They promote culture and economic development. They promote positive public relations, which you can't really put a price to. That's the kind of things that makes a community a great place to live and brings people to town. They improve our quality of life. They do require city support, and that's one of the challenges that we are going to discuss tonight. And then they also require management, and that's something that cities aren't necessarily the best at when it comes to events. So some of the challenges are, in our current situation, is that we have to react. Our management of these events is reactive because they come at us that we're not aware that they're coming. We don't have a time frame set up, and they are constantly evolving, and there are constantly new events coming forward. So the only option that we have is to react. And this was okay when Stillwater was smaller, events were smaller, and there were fewer of them, but it's getting to the point where we've got to have a better system in place. Another challenge is that we don't budget for these. Any of the budgeting that's done is for these events comes from things that were budgeted for other reasons. So when we support these events, that comes from operations, from police and fire, and they're not specifically budgeted for, which also makes it difficult when we don't know sometimes that a new one is coming along. We have no method for cost recovery currently. And all of this causes us to have some inconsistency with how we treat each event. So event planners never really know what the city can and can't do for them in advance. And a lot of times we wind up doing things that, again, cities aren't necessarily good at when it comes to organizing these events. There are also some legal issues. Legal staff winds up providing answers to questions that aren't necessarily city questions, things like sales tax permits and state alcoholic beverage statute issues. We have to do these events for the most part with overtime, and the reason for that is the operations staff that we use has a set job during the week. We can't adjust the schedules to cover events on the weekends without giving up something during the week if we're going to avoid overtime. And that means that water lines aren't getting fixed, potholes aren't getting filled, etc. And the way we do things now is inefficient because we are doing things that cities aren't necessarily shouldn't necessarily be providing for these events, and we're using equipment operators, for example, to set up stages. So we're using employees that cost more than they should, but it's what we have. So cost of these events, as of 2015, it was roughly $250,000 a year in resources. We've spent 1,033 staff hours this year so far, since January 1. And that isn't staff hours meeting and organizing, that's staff hours with boots on the ground. So that's operations staff, that's police, fire. And that equates to roughly $34,000 in labor costs. So since the OSU study, we have done a lot of other research in getting prepared for this issue. OSU recommended that we implement an event coordinator and that we have regular meetings, and we've done both of those things. The other recommendation that they made is that we have an annual budget and some form of cost recovery, and that's the part that requires council input and action. We've also, City Attorney's Office looked at other cities, and every other city that we looked at has some form of cost recovery for special events. We've looked at Guthrie, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Jenks, Norman, Broken Arrow, Edmond, Enid. And to give you an example of some of the things that other cities do, Guthrie recovers the cost of city services for non-community and or fee-based events. Broken Arrow, all costs for city personnel, including police and fire, are charged to the event organizer. Edmond has a street closure permit fee of $300, and they also charge electrical services based on time and material. And then Enid has a list of fees. Tulsa has cost recovery fees in place. So all of these other cities do something similar to the type of things that we're proposing tonight. And we've also met with local event organizers to talk to them about what their concerns were and some of the issues that they have. talked to Visit Stillwater quite a bit about the impact of visitor spending and recognizing that visitor spending is important when you talk about these events because they do bring people to town. There's basically three types of events. The first category that we've classified as government events, and these are events sponsored by other government entities. Examples would be OSU Homecoming, the Special Olympics, perhaps OSU football games. Second type, city events. That would be things like the Friday Food Trucks and Tunes and the Arts Festival. And then there are events that are privately organized, and those are events such as the Juke Joint Jog, the Land Run 100. So privately organized events are the focus of the rest of the discussion for tonight. And there are some challenges with these that make them unique. One is the use of public funds. When we use public funds to support these events, we're in some cases supporting charitable causes, which, you know, we might like to support the charities that we like, but that doesn't allow us to discriminate against the ones that we don't necessarily support. And so that's one issue. Another is that we're using public funds to support for-profit ventures in some cases. Not all of the events necessarily align with city goals, and that depends on what the city's goals are for the events. There's two that we have discussed so far, and one is to have a cultural event for the residents, and another is to bring visitors to town. So we will want to make sure that we know what we're trying to achieve when we support a private event. And then public expectations aren't always met. When we start closing roads for events and businesses are affected and the public is affected in their ability to use the roads. And then the city, as I said earlier, winds up getting into a lot of things that aren't part of our core services. We're good at providing fire and public safety and closing roads and things like that, but we wind up doing things like staffing the events, and setting up stages and sound systems and things that are available on the private market. And then we have a lot of times when an event will claim that they're going to bring a significant number of visitors to town, but we have no way of verifying that. And so that's an issue when we look at, since visitor spending definitely does help to offset the cost of some of these things, we need to be able to verify what that is and have some method to do that. One of the things that we haven't had in the past is the ability to track our costs very well, because we've always just kind of flown by the seat of our pants and tried to accommodate these events as best we could. So Finance Department undertook a detailed cost study, and we have developed the cost centers for the things that the city does well, the core services, and we know what those cost now. We're recommending that we establish fees, and you've got a proposed fee structure attached to the report tonight. Those are the costs of what we do. That's not necessarily to say that that's what needs to be recovered. It's just that that's what it costs, and it will be up to the council to decide how much of that you think we should recover. We also talked to Visit Stillwater about visitor spending and what the impact of that was, and they have ways to track that. So that's one way that we can determine if an event brings visitors to town, and we can determine how many visitors it brings to town. We know what the offset is in terms of what they spent while they were here. So we applied some of these things to a test event, which was a recent event that we had in town. And we spent $15,000 in resources on that event, based on the information that we had on sales tax impact, which is what goes back to the general fund where this money comes from. We had $7,100 in estimated sales tax generated. So the cost of that event was $7,900. That's in resources and support. So those are $7,900 in labor that didn't go to other things that it was budgeted for. And from all of this, we developed some policy recommendations. And the first one is that we have an application. And this would result in an events permit, and this would apply to all events that are going to be on public property or to which the public is invited. And the reason for that, whether they require city support or not, we need to know that they're going to have the appropriate insurance to protect the city. And we need to have a deadline on this application so that we're not getting things, oh, I'm having a 5K run in 5 days, can the city support it? We need to have some time in advance to prepare for these. The application would also have a fee, and the industrial management study suggested $50 as a fee for that application. And then we need all the documentation at the time that the application is submitted. We're usually scrambling to find out what we need in terms of permitting for alcoholic beverage sales and things like that. And so we need to make sure that all of that documentation is in place before we go forward. We're also recommending and have begun drafting a resource guide that would help people who are putting on special events to find the things they need from what the city will provide to what you can obtain elsewhere, and give them contact information to get these other things. And then we're recommending some cost recovery. Part of that would be that we think there should be a dedicated budget so that we know going in, here's how much we have to spend on events this year, and we're not taking that from other areas, and we know exactly where the money's coming from. Again, the cost recovery would involve fees, and that proposed fee schedule is based on what it costs, not on what we ultimately determine is going to be the cost recovery level. We're also recommending that they pay in advance. If there's significant visitor impact from some of these things, we've got a method for, we're considering a method for them to recover some of those costs after the fact, but we want to make sure that if things don't pan out the way everyone thinks they might, that the city's costs are covered. We want to limit the resources that are available to a menu of items that the city is good at providing: traffic control, waste management, public safety, items like that. Get out of the business of setting up things that are available on the commercial market, like tables and chairs and stages and sound systems, so that we provide just like anyone else would. Here are the things we do. This is what we provide. This is what it costs. We're going to need several enabling ordinances and resolutions in order to make all this happen. We're going to need something to set up the application process, to authorize the fee structure, and for enforcement of this. And then we're also recommending that there be a rebate process for events that do bring a significant number of visitors to town. That would be an optional application that they could make after the event has occurred. And we have some consistent evaluation methods in mind, one of which I mentioned was Visit Stillwater. The Oklahoma Tax Commission also has some visitor evaluation methods to determine what the impact is. And then this would require council approval, so the event organizers would come to council with this information, and council would decide if they do in fact get a rebate on the cost of the event. So the purpose is discussion, and I'll leave it at that.
There's no vote tonight on
No, we're just
listening.
asking if you would like us to move forward, but in the schedule of costs, it was suggested at a recent meeting that there are private businesses at Barricade Streets that could probably do that job cheaper than the city of Stillwater. And indeed there are, $14 cheaper. And that did not include the time that city staff would spend setting up the pre-warning signs that if you park in this area at this date and time, your car will be removed. So I think in the end result, the city's probably, believe it or not, less expensive than the private industry. So we think those I'm complimenting John here on his effort in putting those actual costs together, and you hear people that look at you and say, how can it possibly cost you 900 and some odd bucks to install a temporary electric pole? Well, it does. You've got to gather the material, you've got to take it to the site, you've got to put it up, you've got to connect it to and then you have to do all those things in reverse. So, and some of the fees he used, when we provide water at an event, we give them a meter, a whole connection thing that goes from kind of a fire hydrant size down to a hose size, and those meters are expensive. So there's a $1,200 deposit on that meter, and that's to protect the asset the city owns. So those fee schedules look high, but John's done a very, very good job putting those costs together with help from
I would have to say
finance.
finance did a good job putting those costs together.
Counselors, questions?
A few comments, I suppose. I don't want a policy around this issue, and I think this is, I mean, we clearly need a clearer policy, a clearer set of steps that somebody needs to go through to set something up like this. I mean, it's absolutely needed. I think it needs to be approached instead of from this these event organizers are burdening the city and therefore we've got to recover this burden. I think it needs to be approached from the standpoint of this stuff is good for Stillwater. We want these things to come here, and we want to attract more events to come here because we have such a good, easy, clear process. It may not be the cheapest place in the state to do something. It may not be, there may be some hurdles that you have to jump through, but at least you know what they are. At least, we've got a policy in place that encourages good events to come to town, because I think, there are lots of great events that happen here that we want to continue to bring. I mean, things like the Special Olympics and, the Juke Joint Jog and the Remember the 10 and Land Run and those things that really do have a great impact on town. And so I want to make sure that when we're putting this together, we're putting it together from the standpoint of how do we encourage this stuff to happen in Stillwater while still protecting the city's resources and not getting ourselves in situations where, we're supporting things that maybe don't need to be supported.
One of the things that we're doing is, and I'm going to shock her here, we're visiting with Christy about becoming the point of contact for those people who are actually going to bring visitors to town. And there's probably nobody better in Stillwater, selling Stillwater, than Christy Morrison.
Sure.
So she would actually work with our event coordinator, and she would take care of all of those issues that we sound kind of bureaucratic about,
Yeah.
frankly.
And that's our
And-
job. I mean,
Yeah.
our city staff is here to make sure the city is protected and to make sure the city resources are used wisely and all. And I get all
And I think that's probably falls into one of the category of one of the things that cities don't do well, and we need someone to be the
Yeah.
face and to make it positive and not worry about the nitty-gritty stuff.
So that rolls into kind of my second question or comment about this is just, we're talking about having an application and requiring people to make sure they have all their other stuff in line, if they need an ABLE permit, if they need sales tax permit. Are we providing all of that information, or how are they gonna know when I turn this application in, here's other stuff I may have to get?
We're going to have, and we're working on that in a draft form, and it actually, the example we've got is Oklahoma City, but it is going to be a very detailed resource guide. Here are all the things that you need to think about. Here, they'll know in advance what they need to do, as opposed to how it is now is we have multiple meetings and we're constantly kind of figuring it out on the fly, but have a clear guide in advance of here are the things you need to think about, here's who to contact, here's what you're going to need, so that everyone knows that up front.
And someone like Christy or Christy will be involved at that step in the process and helping them figure out all the stuff that they're going to have to do before they come to the city. So they bring everything together at once.
Right, and there will be one contact at the city, so it's a two-person show where Christie contacts our person, and next year Bobby, instead of having to deal with the crusty old city manager, gets to deal with Christie. And So, excuse me, so we're trying to eliminate some of that obstructionist
Plenty
appearing.
of staff time in those meetings that we could
Right.
use elsewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple comments on this cost recovery and sort of the potential rebates of cost and that kind of thing. I'd like for us to see less than 100% cost recovery options at least, because, there is public benefit in these things, right? Even if they're privately, even if it's a for-profit event, there is an intangible public benefit for those things, right? I mean, not just sales tax that comes in. I'll just use the land run, as an example, right? I mean, there's sales tax that's generated, sure, but there's also a ton of publicity that gets generated. I mean, a lot of national magazines and blogs and that sort of thing wrote about that this year. Stillwater got a lot of positive attention out of it. That's stuff that you can't really necessarily quantify in a sales tax analysis. And maybe we can quantify it. Maybe it's part of that, publicity and that sort of thing is included in those cost equations. But I want to make sure we are considering that kind of stuff when it comes to, it's not just a sales tax generation issue. It's also publicity and advertising and marketing for the community, and a recognition that events like this, good events, having event planners that come and put something on here and having it go smoothly, in and of itself is a positive for other things coming and for people going, yeah, Stillwater is a great place to do that kind of thing. You should go check that out. So we do need to make sure we're building in here some of that intangible benefit we get and not just looking at it as sales tax generation and, hard costs. There are soft cost benefits here. That's all I got.
Well, and to kind of piggyback that comment, I'll kind of follow it up with a question. With the other cities that we looked at, Enid, Broken Arrow, Guthrie, et cetera, what is the cost recovery percentage that those cities use? I mean, is it a pretty wide distribution, or are they all?
It's a fairly wide distribution based on, and I've got numbers here in some cases, but I would say they're not recovering 100% of the cost. So they have somehow factored in some other considerations.
Do we have an idea of, I mean, I know it's kind of preliminary and we may not be at that point yet, but do we have a number or an idea of what we're looking at as far as cost recovery for Stillwater?
In terms of a percentage,
Not
that's kind of part of the purpose for discussion tonight.
Yeah. Less than 100.
It'd be great to be able to see, to help make that decision about what we think there, to see sort of what's the current, what would it cost to run, a certain kind of event under 100% cost recovery, under 50% cost recovery, and sort of get a sense of what's the actual fee going to be to run something that's potentially been done in the past, or just a hypothetical event of some kind. Because a $1,200 deposit and $900 to get the electric up and all that sort of thing, you start to look at it and go, we may get to the situation here where nobody's gonna be able to come do anything, right? I mean, it's just going to be cost prohibitive. So we want to make sure that whatever we've got at least a pretty practical, here's what it's going to cost to run X type of event. If it was Food Trucks and Tunes run by a private sort of entity, what would they be paying to do that? So we can get a sense of what we're really going to end up charging people, and don't kill
We'll say on the test event too, if you back out the things that wouldn't be on our menu of things the city provides, they did cover the costs of things that the city does provide, like barricades and things like that. It's those other things that the city's trying to provide, but we're not necessarily good at. It's probably more expensive than it ought to be. If you really split those out, they come a lot closer to covering the city cost.
Okay.
That would be part of that.
And do we have private businesses or some kind of industry here in Stillwater that provides services that, and I wouldn't even pretend to know what additional services those are for a certain event, but, for example, barricades, chairs. I mean, do we have industry here in Stillwater that we could even promote in, our brochure? Do we have that industry here? Somebody that provides that?
We do have some, and especially things like stages and sound systems, tables and chairs. Barricades are not something that we would necessarily say that should go outside the city because there are specific requirements for how we have to set up road closings. But there are definitely resources available, and we're going to go through and identify all of those and give them contact information on that.
So on some of these other things along those same lines about, an outside industry being able to provide it, say, the waste management is $17.50 for a car per day. I mean, if I, as an organizer, wanted to just bring in my own trash cans, can I do that, or am I required to use the city? Same thing with, electric, right? I mean, if I've got an electrician and he can set up is that possible? I don't even know if that's possible.
Yeah, I think that would be things.
Terms
we
and
would have to
conditions
do.
would not allow that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you brought in your own trash cans and they filled up with trash, you still got to do something with them. So be best for that to remain a city function, I would think.
So the things that the city does well, we'll keep under,
Right.
I think it's worth at least looking at what of those could be, they'd have an option. You want to use the city to do your trash collection. If not, you can haul it off yourself, but you have to, there's a standard you have to do. Or if there are options there where we can give people, the city can do this. I mean, the city can rent you a stage. It's, more money than it would be if you went and got it from somewhere else. But I mean, we should at least, if somebody wants to rent it from us, we might as well take the money, right?
or here's a private business, local Stillwater business you can rent it from
Sure.
for $100 less.
But the idea of giving them those options to be able
Yeah.
to say, here's, you've got different ways you can do it if you want to. You can do it the really convenient way and let the city do it, or you guys can, I don't know how many of those options there really are without making it too kind of crazy, but I want us to figure out a way to encourage these things to happen. I'm sorry, I said I was done, now I'm
That's
done.
okay, that's okay. When you said the more convenient way, sometimes I think that's not the city's way, maybe is the more convenient way, because we still have to have some ownership, the city does, because there are certain things we do really well. Roads, barricades, things like, you've named them. So I would feel a little less comfortable just really releasing that to other companies to do unless, I don't know, I'd have to see it, but I would want the city doing what the city does best, and there are just certain things we do really well, and I don't think we should veer from that. We should just enhance how we do special events so it's better for everybody. And we do need this policy, and we do need to protect city resources. There's a good way to protect both, because I do appreciate all the special events. There's just, if you're not making changes, you're just, you're backing up. So I like that we are thinking about this, and I would like to see more information as well. There's a way to do this. There's a great way to do this, and we appreciate all of the events in town, and I'm with both other counselors. Let's attract even more. Let's just attract the right ones and have a policy in place. And I think it'd be great if Christy is working on this and helping. It takes a lot of the work out of it for city staff, and it's more controlled because it's one person. And it's too hard when you're in a meeting with several people and you have to meet again, and then someone doesn't remember, well, did they say this or this? So I appreciate that you're meeting on this, and that we'll have a better plan.
I think
soon.
that Visit Stillwater will be able to put a friendlier face on it. They're not as
Friendlier
worried
than
about
Counselor
the,
Joyce's face?
well,
I'm not in those meetings.
not as worried about the cost as we are, but the other thing that I think event organizers will appreciate is that it's not this fly by the seat of your pants thing the entire time. They know what they're getting into up front, 30, 60 days in advance, perhaps even more, depending on when they start looking at it, but it's going to be easier for them than it is now.
I would like to see that one of our goals one of these days is that we are the preferred place to host events in Oklahoma. That's That's what we should be aiming for, but we have to start somewhere.
So would Christie and Bobby. Probably several other people are.
Well, I mean, our sales tax collections are not great, right? The only way we get those up, other than raising sales tax, which we're not going to do, is to get more people here buying things, right? So
Right.
this is exactly what, this is how we generate more revenue as a city, is to get more people here to buy things here. And it should be, I mean, we should try to be striving for being the preferred place to do this, to get people from other places and other cities to come here and do stuff here. So,
And it increases quality of life and all the other things that you mentioned earlier. So it is a win-win, but there's always a better way to do something. So let's just figure out that way, and Christie's involved, and
We definitely recognize the importance of bringing people here, and that's why we want to make sure that there's a clear idea of how many are we going to bring, and did they come? Because that right now is difficult. Sometimes you have an event and it doesn't bring anyone, and or it claims to bring a lot of people and doesn't, or it brings a lot of people but we don't know how many.
right.
I wonder, I mean, this is just discussion, so I'm thinking about things like the calf fry and stuff that happens in the county, where I know this year they had plenty of problems around how that happened and what happened there, and if there needs to be some discussion about, because a lot of these events actually take place out at the fairgrounds, the expo center, right, which is not in the city. So I don't, if part of this process needs to be talking with the county and kind of coming up with some joint goals around attracting things, because things that happen out there or things that happen at the tumbleweed for calf fry, I mean, certainly that also brings us economic benefit, and to the extent we're going to benefit off those things, we should be trying to work with them to make sure they happen as well.
Just, they bring us economic benefit, but they also use our resources.
Yes.
A lot of our resources for the calf fry. I'm just thinking of police.
And that's well coordinated between Payne County Sheriff's Office and the PD.
Well, at some level, it makes sense to approach event attraction from a county-wide kind of perspective,
think
because
so, too.
they are using county facilities for some of these events too, and again, that's just,
Well, and I think that's great to coordinate with to have more coordination between the city and the county anyway. I think we should be looking at that as well. Good suggestion. So are you clear on what we want?
I will go back and review the tape.
There is one piece of clarification I can make. We can give options in most cases. There's a couple where we can't. Ordinances involving alcohol, when we're talking about barricades, have to be city staff, because there are some specific ordinances that we have to allow those events to occur. Same with the barricades. And in fact, the matter is, we've determined that through that whole process, we're only $14 higher than those that have the capability of setting them up and comply with MUTCD rules. So,
as part of this process, can we look at the city ordinances relating to alcohol and potentially change them?
He's nodding his head.
I don't know if part of our request of staff at this point is to say, can you guys look at that and see what
We'll
would
bring
need
them
to
back
happen?
to you to look at. They're probably overdue for an overhaul. There's one ordinance in particular that was amended about 5 times during my tenure here, and it's always to expand the number of places where that can happen. So it may have outlived its usefulness.
I would love to review those.
Second. That wasn't a motion, was it? Yeah.
I could make a motion about that.
No,
and we appreciate it. I think we have enough guidance to continue working.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then my last question is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Please vote. And with a vote of 3-0, we are adjourned for the May 22nd City Council meeting. Thank you, everybody, for